Hello, welcome back to Piers Rocks. Today I've got the big guns out so we can remaster some original copy protected games. Here's a list of the things you're going to need in order to make copies of original copy protected games for the Commodore 64. First thing you're going to need is the image of an original game disc. You can either produce this yourself from an original disc in .nib or .nbz format. Those are produced by nibtools, or you may have a source of .nib or .nbz files. I'm not going to help you find .nib or .nbz files. You should obviously have the rights to copy any images that you're looking to remaster. The second thing you're going to need is you're going to need either a 1541 drive with a parallel port modification, or you're going to need a 1570 or 1571 disk drive. So the technique we're going to use to remaster the discs requires faster communication with the disk drives than the standard 1541 serial mechanism supports. So with the parallel mod, this provides faster communication with 1541 drive. The 1570 and 1571 drives don't need any modifications because they come with a faster serial interface, which will allow you to remaster original copy protected discs. The third thing you're going to need is an XUM1541 device. So this has USB to plug into a PC, a Linux computer or a Mac, and it has a serial port on it. It also has a parallel port on it. I'm going to use the 1570 mechanism for remastering discs, so I'm only going to need to use the serial port on my XUM1541. If you're using a 1541 with a parallel port modification, then you're going to need to use the parallel port as well. Then you're going to need the tools to actually control the disk drive of your choice from your PC, and you're going to need OpenCBM and nibtools to do that. You're going to need a blank floppy disk to write the image to, and finally you're going to need a bunch of patience because it's probably not going to work first time. You're probably going to need to play around and experiment with things. So everything I'm going to do here is going to be done with a Linux PC. As I've said before, I find it much easier to play around with devices like this on Linux than I do Windows, because the USB drivers just seem more robust and easier to get working on Linux than they are on Windows. So with that, let's get started. First step is to install OpenCBM and nibtools. You can find them both on GitHub. This is the link where you can find the OpenCBM project, and here's the link where you can find the nibtools project. So you want to git clone both of these projects and follow the instructions to build them. They're both pretty straightforward. You just need build packages on your Linux machine and to do make and sudo make install. I think there may be a few extra steps with OpenCBM. Next step is you want to plug in your XUM1541 or ZoomFloppy device. So I've already got my XUM1541 plugged into this top 1570 drive, and you want to do that without the drive powered so as you don't risk damaging the disk drive. And then plug your USB cable into your Linux PC, and then you run dmessage, and it should have detected your XUM1541, which it has. If you don't get this device recognized but you get another device recognized, then you need to flash the firmware onto your XUM1541 device. You can do that by running the XUM1541 config tool with the path to the appropriate firmware image, which, let's see if I can remember it. There we go, XUM1541. I've been using the ZoomFloppy firmware. So if you run this command, it will flash the firmware to your XUM1541 device. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to assume that it's working fine because I've used this XUM1541 plenty of times in the past. Next thing to do is get yourself a blank floppy disk. Now, before attempting to image a copy protected game onto a floppy disk, I like to format the floppy disk first, just to make sure that the disk is in tip-top shape. You don't want to be hitting errors trying to write your copy protected game and you're wondering what's going wrong. It turns out to be a disk fault. So check that your disk is fully operational before you attempt to actually write the game. So here I've got a used floppy disk, one that I've previously formatted and checked is good. So I'm going to run one of the OpenCBM formatting tools on this disk. There are a couple of different formatting tools in OpenCBM. I use CBM4NG, which I think is the newer of the two tools. And there's a number of options that you can provide this tool. In particular, I like to run this with the clear option, which wipes the disk before it writes each track. I like to do -O to fill it with the original data from a stock 1541 formatting. And really importantly, I like to use the -X option, which formats all 40 tracks that should be available on the disk, rather than the 35 that Commodore generally use. That's because copy protected games quite often use more than 35 tracks, and you want to make sure that the entirety of the disk media that you're going to use works. I also like -S just to show me that everything is okay on the disk drive once the format has completed. You then enter the drive number, you enter a name for your disk, and you enter a 2-digit ID. And 1541 I can hear has started operating behind me. This will take about a minute to complete. So it didn't take a minute to complete. It failed to write to this disk. It hit a read error. So I'm going to try another floppy disk in the drive just to check that it's not a disk problem and not a drive problem. So really importantly, when you're using used floppy disks, is to use one that is a double density or quad density disk, either 48 or 96 TPI disk, and also really importantly, make sure that it's not a disk that's been written to via high density disk drive. So I found with a bunch of second-hand disks I bought off eBay, even though they're double density disks, I think they've been used in PC disk drives at a high density, and high density disk drives have a stronger magnetic field emanating from the heads, which I think prevents these older disk drives from actually being able to reorient the magnetic material on the disk. So I'll attempt to format this disk. Okay, this looks more successful. Famous last words, not working. So 3 disks have failed to write. I'm suspecting the read-write heads on this disk are dirty. I removed the top from this disk drive and discovered that the read-write head wasn't plugged in. So obviously after a previous repair effort, I failed to plug that read-write head back in. Okay, this is looking like it's now succeeding. The long pulses we're seeing on the LED are it writing and then verifying each track. Yeah, that completed successfully. So we can see that all 40 tracks were written, and there was one retry which was on track 1. We also get to see the speed of this disk drive, so it's very close to the stock 300 RPM. So we're now ready to take our nib or NBZ file and try and create a copy of that original game. To write a copy protected game, use nibwrite. I've listed the options of nibwrite on the screen here. Really importantly, when you're writing a copy protected game, is to figure out what sort of copy protection the game has. I know this has VMAX 3. I'm going to be writing a copy of Arkanoid 2, and then use the appropriate switch on nibwrite. For VMAX copy protection, it's -PX. So I will kick off the write, and nibwrite will now do some testing of the disk drive before actually going ahead and writing all of the tracks. Right, that's done, and nibwrite thinks it's worked. Just to explain a few bits and pieces what you're seeing here, the unformatted tracks 38, 39, 40 and 41 are expected for this game. That just means that there was no data in the nib file for those tracks. We can see that this game uses tracks 1 to 37. We can also see that before it kicked off, nibwrite sent its own code to the 1570 disk drive, which is calling 1571, in order to support the nibwrite tool. We can also see that it did a check of the speed, and it came up with very nearly 300 RPM. So we'll now test this game in the Commodore 64, and I'm not expecting it to work for a reason that I'll share once we've confirmed that it does not work. I have the copy of Arkanoid 2 that I just wrote in this 1541 drive here. That's connected to this Commodore 64, so I'll attempt to load it now. The first thing we should see is a VMAX copy protection screen should appear after the drive has bumped its head. So yeah, we get the VMAX copy protection screen appear. Now with a properly remastered disc, or the original disc, this should disappear after 2 or 3 seconds. It's not disappeared, and I can hear that the disk drive is continually seeking, reading, and it will do this forever because we have not properly written this game image. So what's the problem? Well, the problem, counterintuitively, is that this 1571 is rotating at around 300 RPM. We saw it was about 299.6.7 in the output from nibwrite. With a VMAX copy protected game, you need to slow the disk drive down so that the disk drive has time to get enough data on the tracks. Presumably when they wrote VMAX copy protected games, they used different drive devices that could fit more data on the disk than the stock 1541 or stock 1570 could. If you slow down the drive to 297.5 RPM, that will give nibwrite and the disk drive enough time to get all of the data on the track before the disk has fully gone one revolution. That's why I have this second 1570 here, because this 1570 has already had the modification made to it to reduce the speed to 297.5 RPM. I keep this drive set at 297.5 RPM in order that it can write VMAX copy protected games. So let's do that now. So I have this second 1570 powered up and hooked up into my Linux PC now via the XUM1541. I have the disk that I originally wrote Arkanoid 2 to in this disk drive. I'm not going to bother reformatting the disk. I know it's a good disk because it formatted successfully in the other drive. What I'll do is I'll reissue the nibwrite command to this disk drive. So we can see that it will do a bit of testing of the drive, it will upload its code to the drive, then it will do an RPM test, and we should see, there we go, we see 297 and pretty much bang on a half. So now it's going through and writing all the different tracks, and this time hopefully it's successfully laying down all of the data on the disk, and this copy of Arkanoid 2 will load. So we'll give that a go. Moment of truth. Will this version of Arkanoid 2 load? So we get a VMAX screen. This should hopefully disappear. It's disappeared. So doesn't guarantee that this will have loaded successfully. So this game is just going to sit here for a few seconds. The Tato image is going to scroll off the bottom of the screen. It's going to continue loading. It'll put the proper Arkanoid 2 loading screen up, and then hopefully the screen will go black for a few seconds. That means the game has successfully loaded. If the screen didn't go black at the end of loading, then it would mean that it still hit a VMAX copy protection issue. We can see in this case the game has loaded completely fine. This is the regular title sequence for Arkanoid 2. So we've successfully remastered an original version of Arkanoid 2. There you go. I hope you enjoyed this quick video showing you how to remaster original copies of your VMAX copy protected games. One thing I didn't show in any detail was how you go about modifying the speed of your disk drive. I've actually shown it in previous videos, but on the underside of your disk drive, this is the 1570 that I actually used to remaster the working copy of Arkanoid 2. The speed adjustment is actually here on the disk drive. I've drilled a hole in this case so I can access it easily. If you don't have a hole here, then you have to dismantle the entire disk drive to access the potentiometer that's under here. You can then get a small flat blade screwdriver in here and turn it gently one way or the other to modify the speed, while using a tool like nibtools, or there's an RPM tester in OpenCBM as well that you can use to check the speed of your drive. There's also tools for the Commodore 64 to check the speed of your drive. So that's how you go about changing the speed of this disk drive. I know this whole process seemed pretty straightforward, at least it did to me when I went through it during this video, but when I first learned how to make this process work reliably, I made a whole bunch of detours and missteps because I didn't find any good, useful instructions documenting the whole process online. So I hope this has helped somebody out there reproduce original copies of the games of their youth without the somewhat annoying and distracting intros from hackers in the hacked versions of the games. If you did enjoy this video, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, rock on!